Welcome back. I'm Sega Lord X, and in this episode we are going to be taking a look at, can you believe it? More fighting games. Now everybody knows that the fighting genre is fairly prominent on the Saturn, but can you believe I haven't covered them all yet? Going back and looking at my past episodes, you would think, hey, you've exhausted this content, but I haven't. I left games out of my Neo Geo coverage, I've left games out of my other fighting games episode, and I still have more to cover. Who would have thought? Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at even more fighting games on the Sega Saturn. Released by Sega in late 1997, the criminally overlooked All Japan Pro Wrestling featuring Virtua would grace the Saturn. This gem of a wrestling game would mix deep mechanics, great customization, and a fantastic presentation into one of the machine's best non-traditional fighting games. You can customize damn near everything here, and the depth of the wrestling moves presented cannot be stressed enough. Want to break bones? Build a wrestler that hurts people. Want to KO foes with power bombs and brain busters? Build that guy that does big hurt moves. Want to run with a guy that submits everyone? Build a crippler that makes them all give it up. I cannot stress enough just how good of a game this is if you appreciate the sport or the mechanics of wrestling. The N64 often gets all the attention as the machine that had the best wrestling games during that generation. But this game here, along with Fire Pro Wrestling 6-Man Scramble, proved the Saturn was a force to be reckoned with as well. This one is also as cheap as Saturn games can get, so there's no excuses not to have it in your collection. KSS would bring the 3D fighter Anarchie and the Nippon to the Saturn in late 1997. Heavily inspired by Virtua Fighter 2 gameplay mechanics, this fighter runs in the Saturn's higher resolution mode and makes heavy use of VDP2. This allows VDP1 to concentrate solely on the characters, allowing great detail and shading to be used. In fact, despite the subdued character design, there are some of the finest textures you'll see on the Saturn in regards to details. The aforementioned gameplay is fast, with a heavy focus on quick strikes and juggle combos. Much like the character designs, the music is subdued and unexciting, but doesn't ruin the mood overall. Anarchie and the Nippon is a game that is best pursued by fans of Sega's own fighting efforts, but the low prices on eBay may be enough to draw others as well. It's not a game that blows you away in any one area, but its smooth gameplay and crisp visuals shouldn't run you off either. Late 1997 would bring us the Fill-In Cafe developed a Sukkah 120% Burning Fest Limited. Originally developed on the FM Towns in 1994, this series of games would see a number of additions, refinements, and overhauls for various systems over the years. Set in a private school for girls, each club would enter a student into an annual fighting tournament. The Saturn release you see here was perhaps the most impressive at the time, as it featured a major overhaul in graphics, giving the game huge sprites and far more animation than versions previous. It also plays faster and smoother, with a timing and rhythm that rarely allows the action to stop or become disjointed. Graphics are very cartoon-like and whimsical, and the accompanying soundtrack and effects stay in line with that style. Don't be fooled by its presentation, however, as the game has a complexity and depth far beyond what your eyes are telling you. You'll need to adjust quickly to the flow of the game, especially on the harder settings, as the AI can be ruthless in its Terminator-style aggression. This one is also not crazy expensive considering its rarity, going for under $50 regularly. If you're looking for that different style of fighting game, a Sukkah 120 might be exactly what you need. The Saturn got a couple of Dragon Ball Z games, and we'll start with the late 1995 release by Bandai, Dragon Ball Z Shin Butoden. This 2D fighter was exclusive to the Saturn, and is often considered the best 32-bit game in the series. It utilizes the old split-screen presentation from the Super Famicom games when the fighters get too far apart, as well as tons of moves for each fighter, all done in Street Fighter style movements. The usual options are here, such as versus and tournament modes, as well as a Mr. Satan mode, where you place bets on matches and interfere to influence their outcome. I don't feel the game is animated particularly well, especially in the face of Capcom's and SNK's efforts, but the hand-drawn art otherwise is strong, if a bit 16-bit-esque in nature. If you are a big fan of the source material here, this game is strong enough to warrant a look. Years ago this one would go for as high as $70 or $80, but has fallen off in the last few years to a much more reasonable level. It won't compete with Capcom's best, but it's still really fun for fans. The following year, Bandai would release Dragon Ball Z, Idenaru Dragon Ball Densetsu for the Saturn. This multi-platform fighter would be quite different from the previous 32-bit entry, featuring huge open environments, more fighters per match, and wildly different gameplay mechanics and ways to win. Choose characters in battles up to 3-on-3 with any variation of those numbers, and knock the hell out of each other until the power balance gives you the opportunity to go for the win with a final Meteor attack. Much like the gameplay, the visuals here are quite different than the first effort on the Saturn as well. Most of the action takes place off the ground, with zoomed out graphics and much smaller sprites. Everything remains colorful and faithful to the source material, however, and I love the pseudo 3D playfields of trees and clouds. Sound effects are repetitive and grating at times, making me want to turn the sound down to avoid them. Many often considered this to be the red-headed stepchild of the series on the Saturn, but it's a fun enough game considering its meager asking price of sub $20, especially for fans of the series. If you're looking for something deeper and more rewarding though, stick with the first game on the system. Fighters History Dynamite would see a Saturn release in mid-1997, based on the original arcade release by Data East that was famously sued by Capcom for being far too similar to Street Fighter II. This overhaul would be originally done on the Neo Geo hardware in 1994. Again, we'd get the option of a full English translation here, even changing the title screen to the game's alternate name outside of Japan, Karnal's Revenge. Gameplay would remain mostly the same as the game on which it's based, with some refinement to the simple combo system, making them easier to start. Graphically, there is nothing special here, and even though the game uses the 1MB RAM card, it doesn't feel like anything that couldn't have been done on the Saturn without it. Unlike most of the other Neo Geo fighter ports on the Saturn, this game is actually getting up there in price, regularly eclipsing the $50 mark. If you have a keen interest in the series, or are just looking for more Neo Geo goodness on the Saturn, give this one a look. It's nothing mind-blowing, but there is a solid fighter here, and it's a good port overall. Xing would release K1 Fighting Illusion Grand Prix in early 1997. This kickboxing game would feature fighters from various countries dueling it out in short, action-heavy matches. Gameplay is centered on a simple combo system of high and low attacks, with easy-to-get-into controls and a great difficulty curve for new players. Graphics aren't anything special here, but the competent models and arenas are solid enough to give you the illusion you're in a real fight. The soundtrack doesn't fit the game at all, however, and provides nothing to the action beyond background noise. beware of the other K1 games on the Saturn, as they are interactive media discs and not really games at all. K1 Fighting Illusion is cheap on the Saturn, going for as low as a few bucks at a time. This makes it a must-own in my opinion. Early 1996 would bring the SNK published King of Fighters 95. Using the first ROM cartridge on the Saturn, data would be accessed much faster, allowing load times to be extremely short in between fights. Based heavily on King of Fighters 94, 95 would introduce Team Edit as its biggest change, allowing you to customize a team to your liking. The gameplay is influenced by Fatal Fury, and it's not my favorite in the series. It does look great, however, with detailed backgrounds and smooth sprite animations. The soundtrack here is particularly weak, with jazzy tunes that lack any emotional ties to what you're seeing on screen. Curiously, this game would see a European release despite the fact that the others on the Saturn did not, and came with the ROM cart in a special boxed edition. This version is far more expensive than the Japanese original due to its rarity. King of Fighters 95 isn't a bad game by any means. It was just a series that rapidly improved with a new game each year. Even with the ROM cart, it's still cheap as hell, so it's definitely worth owning. Super late in 1996, SNK would give Saturn owners a much better playing game in King of Fighters 96. Featuring numerous small improvements, 96 would play smoother, with better looking sprites, easier to pull off special moves, and gameplay additions to aid evasions and aggressive attacks. Utilizing the 1MB RAM card, load times would be a bit longer in this release, but the game is still a solid port otherwise, especially when considering what an AES cartridge went for at the time. The graphics are again very solid, with great animation and color. The soundtrack would copy 95 and lean heavily on jazzy tunes that I feel did not fit the game at all, and sounds like something you'd hear in a hotel lobby. On the plus side, the game has a full English option, allowing you to follow and play the game extremely easy. While I feel King of Fighters 97 is still the best King of Fighters on the Saturn, 96 was a competent and well improved edition over King of Fighters 95 in many ways. It's also dirt cheap, leaving virtually no reason not to own it. Midway would publish Mortal Kombat Trilogy in mid-1997 on the Saturn. This PS1 port would feature a massive list of characters that would span all three previous main entries in the series, as well as a tournament and tag team options. The Saturn version would suffer next to its PS1 counterpart in a number of ways, mainly in the lack of transparency effects and a number of lost voice samples. The game is also hard as hell, with a difficulty spike around the 4th character in the single player mode. You would need to have some very decent Mortal Kombat skills to cope with this spike, and replaying the game for this episode saw me get my ass handed to me a number of times. Mortal Kombat Trilogy would be the last of the 2D main entries into the series, with polygons taking over in Mortal Kombat 4. This one is also gaining rapidly in price, going well above retail on eBay as of this video. If you're a fan of Mortal Kombat and enjoyed Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 on the Saturn, there is definitely enough here to warrant a look. In late 1996, SNK would bring Saturn fans Real Bout Fatal Fury. I covered Real Bout Fatal Fury Special in my Saturn Neo Geo ports episode, but completely bypassed the first one. Using the 1MB RAM card, this was the first game in the Fatal Fury series that I actually enjoyed. I wasn't a fan of the game before this, Fatal Fury 3, which was also ported to the Saturn, so I had little hope going in. To my surprise, I really dug the new combo system and flow to the game. You'd get the inclusion of a power gauge that allowed cancels and super moves, and it would bring ring outs to the mix as well. Gameplay has been streamlined into 3 attack buttons, which would lead you to believe that the gameplay would be overly simplified. Not at all. The game still plays great and has a massive moves list to choose from. Graphically, it's not as nice as its sequel, but it still looks great, with smooth animations and great backdrops to fight by. The soundtrack is a bit hit and miss, but does the game justice overall. One great point of interest is that this Japanese-only release has a full English option, an option that would appear regularly in Neo Geo ports. This is also a very affordable game on the Saturn, and if you like to add another Neo Geo port to your collection, you can't go wrong with this one. So after looking at all of these episodes and all of these fighting games, surely I'm done now. I have covered every fighting game there is to cover on the Saturn, right? Wrong. After doing some research for this episode, I realized there's even more fighting games on the Saturn. I'm getting close to covering them all, but I still haven't gotten them. Look for those in episodes to come. I'm Sega Lord X. I really appreciate you guys watching. I am almost 1,600 subscribers now. Channel is growing really fast for such a small niche market that the Saturn was, but still it is so cool that you guys are joining me, watching my content, and talking about this great system. I really appreciate it. I'll catch you next time.